Washington Journal continues.
We talk now with Representative Pete Hoekstra, a Republican of Michigan, who's ranking member on the Intelligence Committee in the House. Congressman, you'll be getting a briefing today by the administration on that Christmas Day bombing attempt. What do you want to know?
Well, there's really a couple of things I want to know. Number one, this is kind of personal for me. I come from the state of Michigan, and this was an attack on our largest city, the city of Detroit. So, do we have any indication at all that Detroit was, picked for a specific reason, and that this is an indication that it may be a target sometime again in the future, or was Detroit, just a choice of convenience? It could have been Atlanta, it could have been Minneapolis, could have been New York, or any other city. It just, guy was heading to Detroit. And the second thing is, I really want to find out why after Fort Hood, which had very much the same footprint, Awlaki, the American-born radical cleric in Yemen. It had al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, and it was an attack on America. What steps did the administration take immediately after Fort Hood and in the intervening time between Fort Hood and the Christmas Day attack? I mean, did we put enough emphasis on going to the Arabian Peninsula on Awlaki that who knows what could have happened if we had focused there? I think that the refusal to recognize Fort Hood as a terrorist attack meant that there were certain things that we didn't do in that intervening window.
The president said regarding Detroit, they had the intelligence, they failed to, quote, connect the dots. He did say it's unacceptable. They're working on it. And what do you make of that response?
Well, I'm glad that the president recognizes, number one, that it was a terrorist attack. The second thing, that he recognizes that there are continued weaknesses in the intelligence community. And, they collect a lot of data. And what we now need to do is develop a system. I worked on the 9/11 report. I worked on intelligence reform. I don't think information sharing is the real key issue anymore. Now the information is we've got all of this data coming into all of these different organizations. We need a system that pushes information out that says, hey, we're listening and we're getting this chatter out of Yemen that's talking about a Nigerian. We're getting this father coming into the embassy in Nigeria saying, hey, my son's moving over to the radicalized side, and starts connecting some of this and pushing it out and saying, this is some information data that comes together. We now need a live person to analyze this stuff.
Phone numbers for our guest on the bottom of the screen again, separate lines for Democrats and Republicans and Independents. We're talking about U.S. policies on terrorism. Our guest is Representative Pete Hoekstra, a Republican from Michigan, who is ranking member on the Intelligence Committee in the House. So in addition to that briefing, you and ranking members on several committees sent a letter to the White House. You've touched on it a little bit so far, but speak more about the letter that you've sent and what were the major points.
Well, I mean, the frustrations that we've had is that we've had no briefings on Fort Hood. The president got a report to be done on November 30. That report was delivered to the White House. Congress still hasn't seen it. Again, I thought Fort Hood was a terrorist attack. And a radical, what really caught my interest again was a radical Islamic cleric who's American-born, Awlaki. What is his influence? I mean, this is, when al-Qaeda gets someone who is an American as part of their operational or inspirational network, that's a coup for them. And so what was going on, and what did we learn, and what do we know about Awlaki, and what did we do as a result? And they continue to refuse to brief us on that. I mean, I was in Yemen on New Year's Day. And expressly, the White House had called the ambassador, and the CIA 7th floor had called the station chief. This had never happened to me before, and said the congressman may ask particular questions about a range of issues that the committee does have jurisdiction over. But if he goes into that area, you've got to tell him that that information will be forthcoming to him from Washington. It's kind of like, excuse me, you can't talk about stuff that you're doing here, and the answer that you've got to give me is, sorry, Congressman, go back to Washington and get that answer. And it's kind of like, I've already know they won't give me that information. There's a high level of frustration here.
Before we get to calls,
yeah.
You mentioned Yemen.
Yes.
What did you learn there?
Well, I mean, we learned a lot of things in Yemen. It's always good. It's kind of, you get a fire hose for 12 hours from the people in the country telling you everything that they want you to know about Yemen, the ambassador to the station chief. Alaki's a problem, the American-born cleric. Gitmo detainees that have been returned to the Arabian Peninsula are a problem. They form kind of the core of al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. Alaki and these folks then have a special interest in attacking the United States because they are so tied to the United States. So the franchise on the Arabian Peninsula, the al-Qaeda franchise, is different than the senior leadership in Pakistan and Afghanistan of al-Qaeda in what their goals and objectives are. Afghanistan and Pakistan, senior leadership is focused on the battle in Afghanistan and, disruption in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, sure, they're interested in what's going on in Yemen and on the Arabian Peninsula, but they have as a special focus that they want to attack the United States, and they're willing to do smaller attacks. They will take satisfaction out of the attack on Fort Hood. 14 Americans killed. They will take satisfaction if that plane would have gone down in Detroit. We would have lost roughly 300 people on the plane. We don't know how many people might have died on the ground, but it wouldn't have been on the scale of 9/11. We've always thought that senior leadership of al-Qaeda wanted to do something as big, if not bigger than 9/11, as their next statement. Al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula is willing to accept smaller victories.
First call for our guest. He's ranking member on the Intelligence Committee in the House, Camden, New Jersey. Lewis, Republican. You're on with Pete Hoekstra.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Hey, good morning.
Easy question. When we catch somebody and they are here on a visa and we catch them planning to do an attack, how come they're not charged with spying or espionage? And another question. If they are a citizen and we catch them planning to do an attack, how come they're not charged with treason? And one final footnote. With this administration, I feel that the terrorists believe it's open season on the United States. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Hey, great. Thank you. I'd like to say there's easy questions and there's easy answers. In this area, there are no easy answers to some of the questions that you've asked, although the points that you've raised are points that I would typically agree with. We've asked the President, and as a result of the Christmas Day attack, to kind of move exactly in the direction that you're talking about. Number one is we need to recognize that people coming to the United States and traveling to the United States from overseas, this is a privilege, not a right. So if we get information that people may pose a threat to the United States, we put them on a no-fly list or a selector list. If they want to come here, they've got to go for the real more in-depth interview. The second thing is if they come here and they commit a crime, absolutely a terrorism act, charge them to the full extent, but put them through a military tribunal. Take them out of the civilian courts. They do not deserve the rights and privileges of this that our civilian court system provides. The third thing, and this is, I think, an important point that you make, is for Americans who become traitors, the al-Awlakis of the world, the spokesperson for bin Laden, who's an American, the DC-5 who left the U.S. Sometime, I think in November, and went over to Pakistan to practice jihad. These individuals need to be treated as the traitors that they are. And we have to accelerate and remove the barriers to dealing with these individuals. And then the fourth point that the recommendation we made to the President is if we've got Gitmo detainees who are from Yemen, who are from Saudi Arabia, the President sent 6 of them back to Yemen late December. Stop it. Leave them in Guantanamo. Don't send them back to these countries with major ungoverned areas. They don't want them back. They go back and form and join. Too many of them are joining al-Qaeda again.
To the line for Democrats now. Ed, you're in Wilmington, Delaware, for the Congressman. Hi there.
Hi.
Good morning.
See, I was. It seems like we're talking about swatting flies. What is the real root cause of this war against Islam? This crusade that Bush announced. We have to go back to like that New American Century document that was produced for Israel by all these American thinkers, and they asked for a new Pearl Harbor. And then next thing we're having 9/11, just after Cheney assumed control of, the airspace, this and that. And the Crossing the Rubicon is a good book. It says, here we have Israel, a country with 600 nukes, hundreds of ICBMs, a satellite system that they blackmailed from us. You can read about, Seymour Hersh writes about it. And we have to assume Israel's enemies, even though they do terroristic actions against their neighbors, and basically are having a Holocaust against the Palestinian people. Why are the people reacting to that our enemies?
Congressman?
Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right. You need to take a look at what the root causes of this radical jihadist movement against the United States are, and you've outlined a couple in one form. That sure, our support of the State of Israel is a cause that motivates these individuals. They are not big fans of democracy. They don't believe in equality of women's rights. They don't believe in freedom of religion. At their core, they despise our way of life and the values that we espouse. And so there's a fundamental difference between radical jihadists, their view of the world, and the view of the United States. And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. We do need to understand those root causes and recognize that, that it's not going to be easy to address these problems, and why it is so difficult for those, it gives you an understanding as to why it's so difficult to say, well, we're going to negotiate with these folks. I'm sorry, I'm not sure that there's a negotiated path to reconciliation between the jihadist movement and the values that we have here in the United States.
On the Hill itself, Congressman, of course, health care out there, economy, jobs, but this story of terrorism, especially Detroit and intelligence matters, we're expecting a lot of activity. Can you give us a sense of the scope of hearings that are coming?
Well, they're, like today, we're getting on the Intel Committee today, we will get a briefing on the Christmas Day attack. The full House then will get a briefing from the President's National Security Advisor, again on the Christmas Day attack. I expect that this will then be followed up by a number of hearings in a series of committees. Homeland Security. Again, there will be more hearings on the intelligence side, and then I'm sure there will be hearings on the armed services side as to exactly what's our level of involvement going to be in Yemen, what's our level of involvement going to continue to be in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But those are not the only ungoverned areas. Somalia. People say, well, this is really surprising, this guy from Nigeria. But I've been to Nigeria a few times, and there's a fault line in Nigeria. The northern part of Nigeria is Islamic. The southern part is more Christian, and right along that fault line there's been a lot of violence, and this is where this individual apparently came from. So, there's going to be a lot of looking at this specific incident, but what we need to do is we need to recognize and continue to take a look at the bigger threat. It is it's almost a global threat. You've got the hot spots, but then you've got the activity that's taken place in Europe and obviously the United States. The
lead story, USA Today, Americans support air travel profiling. It says Americans are divided over whether the president's response to the alleged attempted bombing went far enough. They say, though, that by 3-1, those polled favor the idea of subjecting airline passengers to more intensive security checks if they fit a profile of terrorists based on age, ethnicity, and gender. Good idea?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think again, this is, I spend a lot of time going through airports and, going through Yemen. I'll take a much more intensive, something that goes closer to the Israeli model where they're interviewing people and, you're going for all the right reasons. They still make you break out into a cold sweat and say, I wonder if I'm going to be able to get on the plane, versus what I experienced in Yemen. But it is human judgment. And it's so rather than having a bureaucratic model in place that says, we're going to have we're going to have a body scan, we're going to have all of these kinds of things. People find their ways around those systems. Somewhere along the line, you have to recognize that the bureaucratic system is not going to work. You have to put in and allow for some gray matter analysis that somebody's looking at this crowd and say, that person over there is, for whatever reason, they're behaving suspiciously. Yeah, when they come through, we're going to pull them aside. We may ask them a couple of questions. We may put them through more intensive screening. Whatever those trigger points are, and people that are trained in this, they will be able to spot the kind of behavior that ought to pull people aside.
Sharon is on the line from Norcross, Georgia now. Thanks for waiting. You're on the independent line for the congressman.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Congressman. I voted for George Bush twice. I voted for President Obama last time around. And what I see with what the Republicans been doing for an entire year, maybe a little bit over a year since the election of Barack Obama, is anything that deals with America is wrong. They know the right way how to do it. They know the right way how it should have been done. They know the right way where it should be. There is never, ever an American way of doing things coming from the Republicans. If it's not done by a Republican, then it's the wrong way. So you think it's fair that people like me, who are independent and who vote for people that they believe, are on both sides, not one side, you do my way or else, but both sides looking at everything from an American view?
Congressman.
No, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. I think that's the environment that many of us hope would come to Washington a year ago. That's exactly what the president promised in the campaign, that there would be an American way, and he was going to lead the American way, and he was going to break down the partisanship. And we began the year with a stimulus bill that was $787 billion that was passed with Democratic votes, that the president, from my standpoint, rather than looking at building a coalition where there would be Republicans and Democrats that could support a stimulus plan, or that could support a cap-and-trade plan, or that could support a health care plan that would really enable us to move forward, recognizing that neither Democrats nor Republicans were the repository of having the correct and the right or the American answer. But the president, along with, and I think in some ways driven by the leadership in Congress, Harry Reid with 60 votes in the Senate, Nancy Pelosi with 257 votes in the U.S. House, they made the decision and convinced the president that to get and pass his legislative priorities, getting 218 Democrats to vote for a piece of legislation was an easier way to move forward than trying to get 160 Democrats and maybe 60 Republicans to move legislation forward. And so, they moved the president in a position that said, we're going to take and recommend that you take a more partisan approach, and that we not go along the bipartisan approach on three major pieces of legislation. And it's exactly what happened. I'm disappointed by that. I was more than willing to give this president the benefit of the doubt and to come in, a year ago and to work with this president on each of these issues. And the leadership in the House and the Senate decided that on these major pieces of the legislation, they would go it alone. And you're seeing it now, the final steps as we move through health care. The negotiations are going to be held in secret. They're going to be held with only Democrats in the room. At one time, a year and a half, 2 years ago during the campaign, we were expecting we were going to see all of this on C-SPAN. We were hoping we were going to see it on C-SPAN. It would have been unprecedented. But that is not the direction we're going to be, that the leadership in the House and the Senate are going to be moving, or that the president's moving. They'll be done behind closed doors. We will end up with a partisan approach. I'm disappointed by that, perhaps as much, if not more, than what you are.
Fort Lauderdale, Bud, Republican, you're on the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Representative Hoekstra, I have a question as to why we continue to be on the defensive in screening people to get on airplanes. I think we need to go on the offensive.
What do you mean by that, caller?
Well, I have a specific idea.
Yeah.
Okay. All the people who are trained to be suicide bombers are sent to Mecca and Medina doing the Hajj. And I asked a very high-ranking intelligence officer one time, I said, I bet there's a lot of bad actors at the Hajj every year. I think that's where we need to attack. I think we ought to bomb Mecca and Medina.
Mr. Hoekstra.
Well, I think bombing Mecca and Medina, you got to recognize that the vast majority, and I'm not sure how many are there for the Hajj, but I believe it's probably in the millions. And indiscriminate bombing of the Hajj would be something that I would be opposed to, and I would think would be a relatively, if not a very, very bad idea to, right now within the Muslim community, the number of individuals that have radicalized, is very, very small, and an indiscriminate bombing on their holy sites would be definitely a step that I would not encourage. You can't go there.
There is one Twitter message, though. It says to the congressman, do you acknowledge that we are at war with a, quote, ideology, Islam, they put in parentheses, as opposed to simple poor fanatics?
Well, I think absolutely we're at war with an ideology, the radical jihadist movement as a part of Islam, and we have to recognize that it's an ideology, and more importantly, Muslims need to recognize that there is a core group, that there are some within that are trying to hijack their religion, and they are going to be the most effective and the most forceful in dealing with this issue and this problem within their religion. It is an ideology, and if you take a look at it, people talk about, this is, well, it comes out of the poor and the lack of development. If we just have economic development, I mean, this young man from Nigeria, he came from one of the better families in Nigeria, well-to-do families. His father was a well-respected government official, a high banking official. It wasn't the poverty. It was the ideology that brought him in and embraced that put him on that plane.
Milwaukee. Robert, you're on the line for Democrats for the congressman. Thanks for waiting.
Yes,
Yes,
Congressman Hoekstra. Let me give you a little recent history here. I'm a uniter, not a divider. Secondly, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, and also you were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and I assume that you were capable and a great person to correct some of the problems that have previously happened. And now you're complaining because what you recommended is not even functional. So I really don't know where you're coming from. And you had 8 years of you Republicans. I remember the energy bill, which was secret, if you recall. That was not anything that Obama had anything to do with. And now you're saying that the Democrats are keeping things in secret. Well, you guys kept a lot in secret. And thank you for your time and effort.
Go ahead, Congressman.
I think, I was on one of the Sunday morning talk shows a couple of weeks ago. We were on with Jane Harmon, Joe Lieberman, and Susan Collins, a Democrat, an independent, and 2 Republicans. The 4 of us worked tirelessly to do the intelligence reform bill. We were uniters when we did intelligence reform. I haven't criticized the system that we put in place, other than saying we now need to take it to the next step where we address the problem of information sharing. We now need to address the problem of information analysis. And I'm more than willing to work with Democrats and this president to make that happen. National security should be a bipartisan issue. You'll also find on the record, if you go back, I challenged President Bush pretty repeatedly on his unwillingness to share certain intelligence information or information that I thought we were entitled to on the Intelligence Committee, and we went out and got it. And so just as I'm challenging this president on sharing information on Fort Hood, I challenged the previous president because I think there's a separation of powers here. It is the Congress's responsibility to hold the executive branch accountable and to do oversight, whether it's a Republican, a Democrat, or one of your members or someone else. And you're exactly right, Richard Reed. People are saying, well, this is why we should try the guy in Detroit in civilian court, because that's what we did with Richard Reed. Just because we were wrong with Richard Reed doesn't mean that we ought to be wrong now with the guy in Detroit. Let's set a consistent pattern and to move forward that as we arrest these folks, let's try them in military courts.
Congressman Hoekstra's views are published in The Hill today. If you want to read more, the headline says, "We need to be smart and consistent about the threat posed by terrorists." A lot of the points that we've touched on in this half hour, but wanted to let you know that that's there in print if you want to take a look. Next call is from Michigan. Is it Ishpeming? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, sir.
Ishpeming. Dan, you're on the independent line for Congressman Hoekstra. Hi.
Yeah, here's my presidential voting record first, just to make sure that everyone
Okay.
that I voted for Reagan, Bush, Perot, and Clinton's second term, Gore, Kerry, and Obama. I was just wondering, what do you think about Dick Cheney coming out and calling Obama weak, like the same day as that Christmas, or the day after that Christmas attack, or almost attack, or whatever? And then, as far as information sharing goes, you hear about that thing like the 9/11 Commission didn't even pick up on Able Danger. There was they blocked Able Danger was blocked by military lawyers to share information. It was on purpose. I was wondering what your comments are about that. I'll hang up right now.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you. I think that I understand some of the frustrations that the former vice president may have. Repeatedly over the last 12 months, everything that's been wrong with America has been blamed on the previous administration. And while I might prefer at this point in time to say, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Cheney, just kind of back off. I understand why the Vice President is speaking, because I think he's proud of the track record. It's an imperfect track record on some of these national security, but it was a clearly focused effort. And I think if they're repeatedly getting beat on, he's saying, well, wait a minute. Here's the things that we got accomplished. It may not have been perfect, but I want to set the record straight as to what we got done and how we're different than this administration. The second thing on information sharing, you're absolutely right that I don't remember the specifics on Able Danger, but prior to 9/11, we had boxes of information, and that information couldn't cross the line from the intelligence world over to the FBI, Homeland Security, and these places. We've broken down those walls. The thing that I'm starting to get concerned about is that now that we're treating much of this again as law enforcement, we're going to start building those walls again, and that information is not going to be shared. I can't tell you the number of times over the last 2 or 3 months where I've asked for information, and the answer that I get back is, Congressman, we can't share that information with you because we are now involved in a legal process, and we're going through a legal review. And you kind of say, well, wait, this information is really important to understand the larger context of the threat that we face. And so I'm now worried about that. The box of information that says this is an ongoing investigation. We can't share it with other people. This is what happened after Fort Hood. Did we have information after Fort Hood that was part of the investigative process that should have been given over to Homeland Security and to the intelligence community to try to keep us safe?
Last call, Lawton, Oklahoma. Joe, Republican, you're on the air.
Yeah, I guess about your comment you just made, if we had all the information, we, the public, would be able to combat this terrorism. It's like y'all keeping back all this information. I was wondering if you're familiar with the book, The Final Jihad, or let me put to you the.
I'm not familiar with that specific book. Why don't you give me the particulars of it, or the.
Well, the Final Jihad, or it might be the Last Jihad. All right, the first vice president picked for Bush. Do you know who that was? That was Frank Keaton. Are you familiar with Frank Keaton? All right, he's former CIA, FBI, former governor of Oklahoma. Anyways, he was the first pick for vice president, and he elected not to do it because I imagine that would look funny, him being the governor of the first domestic terrorist act in this country. And then 9/11 happens. But anyways, his book, or his brother wrote a book called The Final Jihad that had a Timothy McVeigh blowing up a federal building. And this book was made 2 years before the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, I imagine y'all being on intelligence committee, y'all know this kind of stuff. But
caller, any specific question for our guest? He's ranking member on intelligence.
Well, that's just it.
Okay.
I really wonder what y'all are doing up there, listening to you contradict yourself, speaking about Obama not leading the charge on terrorism when you just said these House representatives and stuff, the heads of those committees are leading the health care bill, which is directing Obama. who's leading who right there. And
Thanks. Congressman, final thoughts on the intelligence system, the process, what happened on Christmas, and moving forward?
Well, I think this really does now get to be one of information analysis. We have all of this information. We have all of this data. How do we push the data out, the stuff that's important? These are the things that we really need to look at. And the hope and expectation, in reference to this caller, is I hope that we start declassifying more information and make more information to the American people available. The recidivism rate, how many people that have left Gitmo that are now back on the battlefield, how many have we successfully rehabilitated? That is important information as we think about moving this prison into the United States. And as we think about releasing more, I think there's a lot more information that would enable the American people to better understand this threat and be part of the debate. And be a more constructive part of the debate.
Representative Pete Hoekstra, Republican of Michigan, ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. We appreciate your time this morning.
Great. Thank you.